Crimson and Blue Chips family, CABC family. Let's hang out on a Tuesday. John Garcia Jr. here, producer Kev alongside. And we're just going to kind of shoot the breeze a little bit. Yes, intended there. Got a laugh out of producer Kev. He wasn't expecting it. And we're just going to talk about some of the most recent events happening. And we have to start with Drew Brees. If you were under a rock or focused on the Braves losing, you missed Drew Brees breaking the all-time NFL passing record, which is obviously unbelievable. And he got it in the most Drew Brees way. There was a huge coverage breakdown in cover 2. Josh Norman was peeking in the backfield, and he threw it over the top to a no-name receiver who will become a rock-solid NFL player because he plays with Drew Brees. So there's an interesting timeline with Drew, and most of you guys know this by now, but you couldn't help but watch that, and two things happened from at least where we sit. One, you have to bask in the glow of Drew Brees, right? I think does anyone hate Drew Brees? I don't think so.
I don't think.
I feel like everybody respects Drew Brees, not only for what he's done on the field, but off the field, all the Katrina stuff. Everybody remembers that. So you saluted him in some way, whether it was with your eyes and watching his historic moment, perhaps you took to Twitter, whatever. So that was kind of the natural reaction. But then the secondary reaction from a college football perspective is, man, how did the Dolphins doctors get it so wrong, right? And we're not doctors. We don't understand what it was looking like after that shoulder injury in 2005. Before he got to Nick Saban, who wanted Drew Brees in Miami, all of that. But what we do understand is that the trajectory of everything could have changed with Drew Brees and him having a successful physical with those Miami Dolphins doctors, because then Nick Saban has him as his NFL quarterback. Certainly, we don't expect him to stay in the NFL for just 2 years. Perhaps he stays much longer. And Alabama doesn't get close to this dynasty. Certainly not with Nick, at least not at that time. So as the title of this show suggests, did Drew Brees, and more specifically his shoulder, sort of save Alabama and ignite this era of Alabama football? It's just something that popped into my mind as soon as he was like thanking his wife and kids and all of that. I was like, man, like this dude could have been a Dolphin, should have been a Dolphin. And instead it was Dante Culpepper. I was living in Miami at the time, so I was very aware of all of the rumors and things like that. And everybody down there thought Drew Brees was the guy. San Diego had just taken Phillip Rivers. For some reason, they were going to give him the keys to the car instead of riding with Drew Brees. And Miami was going to get this huge free agent, and it was going to be the biggest quarterback in town since Dan Marino. And obviously, it didn't work out that way, and it was Dante Culpepper instead. Producer Kev, do you remember that time? We were finishing up high school, and Drew Brees is on the market, and all of a sudden he ends up in New Orleans and not necessarily with the Dolphins like everyone expected.
Yeah, I just remember the thought of like, why is San Diego letting him go? He's been successful. They've had good teams. Like, what is the deal? Why are they letting him go? I know he's hurt, but like, are they putting that much value into Phillip Rivers, who, if we all remember, was drafted by the Giants, and then of course right. Eli said he wouldn't play in San Diego, so they just swapped picks. And that ended up there. But what about the timeline that would have been if those teams wouldn't have needed quarterbacks? So if the Chargers don't need a quarterback, then what? They don't take Eli. So Eli goes to, where's Eli go? He goes to.
Well, he probably goes to Oakland, maybe.
Oakland, yeah.
Yeah. Oakland that year could have had the number 1 pick, but I traded it. It was I'm looking at an alternate history of the 04 draft on ESPN. They've got Oakland with the number 1 pick, Arizona, New York, Washington, Pittsburgh. And, of course, that's when Pittsburgh took Big Ben. So then they maybe don't.
Imagine if Pittsburgh takes Phillip Rivers.
Right,
Oh,
which is what was suggested in this alternate draft history.
oh God.
Rivers 5, and Big Ben slides all the way to 12 to Buffalo.
Poor Big Ben. He would have ended up cold either way he went. But I mean, that's interesting to think about that one thing changing that much, even pros to college. Because then Saban doesn't leave and go to Alabama because he has a good quarterback and a good team in Miami.
Right.
They don't, and then we don't get the spoiled Bama fan that's used to winning national championships with Saban.
Right. And then let's think of the remainder of the SEC now. Okay. So let's say Nick sticks around in Miami, I don't know, 2-3 more years, even more longer than he did. So Urban Meyer is rolling at UF. He was already rolling at UF, right? When Nick went to the college level, went back to the collegiate level. So he's already rolling, but maybe his heart is a little better. Maybe Tebow doesn't cry, and because Bama's still building up at that point, right? Because the rebuild was what, 07 when Nick got there. That was the only mediocre year he's had, and then boom, 08, Bama was great. 09, even better. We all know what it's been like since then. So the Urban Meyer Florida dynasty extends a little bit longer. So Tebow maybe doesn't lose to Bama the second year. So Florida goes back to back there, and they win what, 3 in 4 years, 3 national titles in 4 years. And we're talking about that as the best run in history without even blinking. So there's so many things that would have changed the course of history. And then who knows for Alabama, by the time Nick is done with Drew Brees, again, even if it was just a couple of years, who knows how that Bama team that was in place performed. Maybe they figured it out and turned it around and got back to respectability. So Nick takes another job, maybe Texas, maybe, I don't know, Florida State, Ohio State. Who knows what jobs were available that year without looking it up. But maybe Nick, when he does decide to go back to college, it's not big, bad Bama. So it is just, the hypotheticals are endless when you look at this thing. Maybe things go so smoothly at Florida that Cam Newton doesn't need that laptop. And he follows Tim Tebow, and Florida rattles off, 3, 4, 5 natties in a short span, and is as feared and hated as Alabama is right now. Maybe all of that goes to Florida. So you just look at the careers that could have changed with the doctors, with the Miami Dolphins of all places, clearing Drew Brees. Now, again, we don't know. We weren't there. We don't know what it was like. And let's be honest, at the time, shoulder injuries to quarterbacks were career enders. You think of guys like Chad Pennington, who was never the same after a similar procedure. People thought even if Drew Brees played, he wouldn't be the same kind of guy. And he was never a guy known for a huge arm or anything like that. He was a smaller, smarter quarterback, a good athlete. So he already didn't have that as a strength. So now it would be even less of a strength. So there's so many scenarios to look at with this Drew Brees thing. But either way, it didn't happen that way. He ended up in New Orleans as sort of a savior for that city and that state, not only with the Super Bowl, but obviously after Hurricane Katrina. And he became what he was supposed to be. It's just interesting to wonder if that would have even happened in Miami. And two, obviously, more importantly for us, what would have happened to college football, because it really set apart the dominoes that everyone is still trying to stack up against at this point. What is LSU's fortune if Drew Brees goes to the Dolphins? How does that change? How does Bama's fortunes change? Florida. I mean, just in the SEC, it's a different picture. So it's just fascinating to think about. Heck, Kirby Smart was on that staff at Miami as well. How does he then look more like an NFL coach after that, instead of coming back home to college ball and eventually to UGA. Who knows, by the time they're ready to fire Mark Richt, that maybe Kirby is an NFL head coach at that point and doesn't want to go back to the collegiate game. So there's so many SEC storylines that really could have changed that it's just fascinating. It's fascinating. But either way, you salute Drew Brees. And if you're an Alabama fan, you thank those doctors in Miami because Drew Brees would have been a Dolphin. And theoretically, Nick Saban, at a minimum, Nick wouldn't have been at Bama as soon as he was, at a minimum. So no Julio Jones. You don't get that early batch of recruits. I mean, there's so many avenues you can jump on with the whole Drew Brees, Nick Saban paradox. And there's a lot of good articles about it now. And the most intriguing thought I looked at today was from the state of Louisiana, okay? Because Drew Brees was ended up in New Orleans with Sean Payton. They won the Super Bowl, all of that, okay? But would you also argue that prevented that move, because of where Saban would end up, literally cut off the collegiate success in that state, because now Nick Saban was going to go to Bama and rule the SEC. So I wonder what's the trade-off there for New Orleans Saints / LSU fans. Do you take the one Super Bowl that you got and you're okay with it, or would you rather have Nick potentially, go somewhere else and the Tigers have that chance to rule the SEC and maybe win another championship? Remember, Nick won, what was that, 03? They won at LSU. Yeah, so they ended up winning another one with Les Miles, but perhaps could there have been even more in the cards there? So I wonder what that fan base would take in terms of a championship. But again, either way, worked out pretty good for Drew Brees. Worked out pretty good for Alabama and eventually for Nick Saban as well. So just fascinating stuff. But that was what was in my mind immediately after Drew broke that all-time yardage record on Monday Night Football. All right, so let's move on to more Bama-specific things in the tangible era instead of the paradox era. Producer Kev, we've tasked him with some numbers because really all year, we've seen some crazy numbers with Alabama, with Tua Tagovailoa, with the offense, with the receivers, with the scoring. There's so many just eye-popping, we've never seen this before type stuff going on at Alabama. So I'm going to turn it over to Producer Kev and just kind of catch us up on some of the numbers. Basic stats are crazy, but when you think of their relation to other programs, their relation to other individuals, it gets even crazier. And that's before you ever get to the fact that it's all happening at a school not known for this, at the University of Alabama.
Yeah. Definitely. The offense going in crazy directions right now. So I'll start with Tua. The crazy video game like stats that Tua has. So he's completed 75.2% of his passes for 1,495 yards, 18 touchdowns. So where it gets kind of crazy on that is he's thrown 18 touchdowns, but yet in those games he's only thrown 25 incompletions. So you're getting to those numbers where you're getting close to equal touchdown and completion ratios that we haven't seen since Geno Smith at West Virginia that year, where he got off to that crazy start.
Oh yeah, he was the Heisman winner at that point, right?
Yeah, he was winning the Heisman game 4 or 5 because he had more touchdowns than incompletions that whole year. So that was with Tua. He's had one game where he threw no incompletions. And then the receivers tweeted it out last night. So if you missed it there, the 4 starting receivers have all had games of 99 yards or better. I got to thinking about it the other day, and I was like, you know what? I feel like all those receivers have had 100-yard games. So me and John started talking about it, and we were talking about the crazy numbers, and I started looking up stuff, and so lo and behold, all those receivers have had 99 plus yard games. And if you want to count Irv as a receiver, which I mean, he's
Might as
probably a
well.
better receiver than he is tight end, but you throw him in there, and now you have 5 pass catchers that have had over 99 yards. And the recapping, Devontae Smith had 99 against Louisville. Judy had 136 against Ole Miss. And Jalen Waddle had 138 against Louisiana Lafayette. Ruggs had 116 against Louisiana Lafayette. Irv had 123 against Arkansas, and Judy had 135 against Arkansas. Irv's was on 2 catches, and Judy's was on like 4, I think.
Yeah, just
so those
ridiculous numbers.
Those numbers are just, if you think about it, I mean, those are like NCAA video game numbers that we used to put up while we were, playing video games back in the day.
What do you think's the craziest one? Is it the incompletions compared to touchdowns? Is that it?
I mean, yeah, you gotta think you throw close to the same amount of touchdowns as you throw incompletions. I mean, it's pretty hard to do. So then, if I wanted to look at another one for the receivers. So Jerry Jeudy, I'm gonna go kind of one by one here. Jerry Jeudy has 23 receptions on the year, and he has 8 touchdowns. So if you do the math, 23 divided by 8, so he's catching a touchdown every 2.8 receptions.
Yeah.
And then Henry Ruggs has 17 catches, and he has 6 touchdowns.
And the fumble recovery.
So that's another 2. He's catching one every 2.8 receptions. Jalen Waddle has 15 and 2, so every 7.5 catches.
Yeah.
So, I mean, these guys have crazy numbers when it comes to the amount of touchdowns per catch and then Irv has 16 catches, 3 touchdowns, so he's catching one every 8. So, I mean, these numbers are just kind of gaudy, if you will.
Yeah, it's crazy to think. And this, again, this is Alabama. This isn't, like you said, West Virginia. This isn't Texas. This isn't USC. How about the overall offense versus the overall defense? Alabama is 4th offensively in America in terms of the rankings, rushing, passing yards per game. The defense is 25th. Now, 25th out of 130 is really good. And we know that the garbage time eras of basically every second half Alabama has played has factored into those numbers and the yardage coming up. I think a lot of people made a big deal about the last 2 games in terms of the numbers. Louisiana Lafayette ran for over 200 yards, and on paper, it's like, what's wrong with Alabama's defense? And I think the point totals with Arkansas has some people curious about us. But there's no way you can equate this year to other years in terms of the flow of games. Bama hasn't had a game.
Yeah.
Bama hasn't had one game this year. Again, Tua has yet to play in the fourth quarter since the Georgia game last year. So I really think you have to factor all of that into the perception with Alabama's defense, because the offense has been so gaudy. We've literally never seen this before, ever. So I think that's all a part of it, and it's creating a little bit of division with perception. I think everyone agrees Alabama's the number 1 team, But because the numbers have been so gaudy offensively, the defense has suffered on paper. Now, is the defense perfect? No. There's still plenty of work to be done. And we'll talk about Trevon Diggs and the replacements here in a little bit. But the point totals, the yardage totals, I think really are a moot point. You're talking about going against the twos in moments that don't mean a bunch. Now, is Nick Saban cool with that? Heck no. But that's Nick Saban. He's not cool with anything. He's trying to find things to be pissed off about, so there you go. But I think that all of the numbers that have been pouring in against Alabama defensively have a lot to do with how good they've been offensively. Bama with the number 4 ranked offense just sounds weird, honestly.
Scary.
Yeah, scary, weird, different. What is going on? You talk about, John Chavis, the DC at Arkansas, who was the DC at A&M. He was the DC at LSU for a number of years. He's been a defensive wizard, guru, whatever, forever in the SEC, 30-plus years of coaching. And he said this is the best offense he's ever seen. He coached against those Tebow, Urban Meyer Gators. He coached against all of the previous Alabama offenses. He's coached against some of the top offenses in the country and outside of the SEC. And this one, after Saturday, he said probably the best one he's ever seen. And again, we're talking about just a few games into the starting career of Tua Tagovailoa. So I think all of those things should reaffirm your faith in the offense and also cut some slack for that defense because they've never been in this position under Nick Saban. So there's so many layers to look at with the numbers. We got some comments coming in regards to those. Christopher McDonald says people worrying about the defense, having Arkansas score 31 points against us in 2016. They scored 30 on one of the best defenses in Bama history. Good point there. Bama Blitz says Tua's efficiency currently 40 points higher than Baker Mayfield at this point last year. That deserves to be in the numbers broadcast for sure. Chris comes back to say the defense has carried us for years. Now I'll let the offense carry us for once. I don't think the offense is just carrying Bama. I think it's getting out to such a gaudy lead that it might appear that way. But those first halves, Alabama's been quite fine on defense when it's been a game, even though we recognize that Bama hasn't necessarily played in a game this year. So again, I think the defense is getting a little bit overblown on the negative side, but I don't know if the offense can be hyped up more on that side, and I think it's justifiable with these producer Kev numbers and just the way it's gone this year. It's hard to think of it slowing down, looking at Arkansas and then looking forward to Missouri, bye week, LSU. I mean, it's kind of just rolling. It's kind of just rolling right now. So, again, when is Tua going to play in the fourth? I tweeted it earlier from @CABC Pod. When is he going to play a fourth quarter snap? Because he hasn't this year, and he hasn't really come close. So all of these numbers that producer Kev rattled off are first half and a little bit of third quarter numbers. So when you think of it like that, it gets even crazier because his touchdown numbers, his efficiency, all of these things are way up there against guys like Kyler Murray and Will Grier, who have played almost every fourth quarter this year. So it's pretty gaudy. I guess we can go a couple of different avenues here, producer Kev. I'll let you make the call. Do we look back at the weekend because we hadn't done that yet, or at least on here we hadn't done that, or do we just focus more on Bama and look a little deeper into that defense?
We can just briefly hit the weekend.
All right. Well, you want to jump on and let us know some of those crazy results. I know Texas beat Oklahoma, Florida beats LSU, Mississippi State beats Auburn. I mean, there were some very interesting results this weekend. Any others off the top of your head?
Then let's see. You had the Miami FSU game. Where FSU actually kind of looked like a decent team. I don't know if that means Miami really is that bad or because they self-imploded in the second half. Florida State did. The Kentucky Texas A&M game, I thought Kentucky was going to be able to pull that out.
I agree.
They just couldn't quite get Snell going, and they couldn't quite get that one pulled out in Kyle Field. I mean, I guess it's like we were talking about the other day. I guess Kyle Field really is that much of an advantage.
Yes.
Then the Notre Dame Virginia Tech game, my sleeper team, they continue to roll, and I think that after beating Virginia Tech, I don't think they're going to be challenged the rest of the year until they get to maybe USC
To the playoffs?
to the playoffs. So, I would I'd go on record as saying that after beating Virginia Tech, that Notre Dame has pretty well inserted themselves into the playoffs if they win out.
How high should they be? Give me the producer Kev Final Four as it stands right now. Where's Notre Dame?
Where's Notre Dame? I'm gonna pull though they're not in a conference card, and I'm gonna throw them in at 4.
Okay.
I just they've beaten. I mean, of course, they beat Michigan. They beat Stanford. And now they've beaten Virginia Tech. So I mean, they've got 4 quality wins or 3 quality wins under their belt.
Yeah, none of those were really close either.
Yeah, so I mean, if they go to, if they go to LA and they beat USC, then that gives them I think that'll give them another quality win. The rest of them is Navy, Notre Dame, Pitt, Navy, Northwestern, FSU, and Syracuse. So I don't see any of those being close.
Yeah, got the ball there.
Yeah, so I mean, Pitt's 3-3, Navy's 2-3, Northwestern's 2-3, FSU's 3-3, Syracuse is 4-2, and USC is 3-2. Who would have thought Syracuse would have had the best record out of that group?
College football, man.
Yeah, so I think it depends on who wins the other conferences. I'm gonna put them at 3 or 4. Okay. So I think the 4 is gonna be, as of right now, I think it's gonna be Alabama, Clemson. Oh God.
Ohio State, Georgia, Texas.
God. As it stands right now, Ohio State, Notre Dame,
West Virginia.
If West Virginia wins the Big 12, then God, please West Virginia, because I don't want to see Ohio State get in. I still think Ohio State pulls a Big Ten and loses one of these games that they're not supposed to. Yeah. And then if they lose and West Virginia wins out, then my coach of the year from the beginning of the year looks good too. And I think that could go. But as it stands right now, it would be Ohio State, Notre Dame. Hypothetically, I would like that to be West Virginia, Notre Dame. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, fun weekend. Let's go back to the SEC because we were very curious about a couple of things. One, how good was Florida? I thought that was one of the points that I thought the weekend would reveal. And like you said, Texas A&M, Kentucky, I thought it would reveal which one is more real, Kentucky being good this year or the home field advantage at Kyle Field. And I think it's the latter. That home field advantage is crazy. If you think about it, Kentucky shouldn't have even been in that game. They had a happy birthday fumble recovery to push that game to overtime. Kellen Mond just every once in a while he has to look like last year Kellen Mond, and he gives other people a chance. So I think we learned a lot there with A&M and Kentucky. Kentucky's defense is still pretty darn good. And then Florida. That's to me as big of a win that they've had in the last, I don't know, 10 years. Going emotionally, going to Mississippi State the week prior, winning in Starkville, Dan Mullen's homecoming, all of that. And then immediately after that, what we know and think is a pretty darn good LSU team, especially defensively, coming into the swamp, and you handle it, and you handle it well. I thought that was pretty revealing. So we wanted to know who was sort of the third best team in the SEC. Was it LSU? Was it Florida? Was it Auburn? And I think right now it's how could you not say Florida at this point? Now they'll get Georgia. They'll get Georgia here coming up, and Georgia will get LSU this weekend, and then LSU or Auburn will get Georgia as well before Bama gets involved with these guys. But you really can't make an argument that it's not Florida at this point. And then after that, somewhere it's Auburn, Mississippi State, Kentucky, schools like that. So I thought Florida was really revealing. That defense is really good. I like the secondary. C.J. Henderson, who was a guy Bama recruited very hard, and maybe the best corner in the country. I thought he showed that against LSU. Their front seven is pretty darn good, very fast, quick off of the edge. I think Florida's a problem. Now, can they compete with and threaten Georgia? I don't know that just yet. I think we all agree that Georgia's the number 2 team in the SEC until proven otherwise. But once again, Georgia hasn't had that one game where it's like, holy crap, here comes UGA. So they'll get that chance very soon against LSU, but they hadn't had it. They hadn't shown it yet, at least. So the SEC is still pretty much chalk, and I thought the Gators, because of their performance and the way obviously LSU lost and the way Auburn has fallen off of a cliff offensively, I think it's safe to say the Gators are number 3 in the SEC, and we're far removed from preseason expectations where it would have been Bama, Georgia, and then 3 or 4 teams before you ever got to Florida. You would have heard Auburn for sure from me. You would have heard Mississippi State from everyone else. You would have heard South Carolina for some on that bandwagon, and we were probably on that bandwagon a little bit more preseason. And then you would have started to hear Florida, A&M, schools like that. But that Gators offense is still nothing impressive, but the defense is very impressive. You talk about some of these defenses in the SEC: Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Florida, Auburn, Mississippi State, Kentucky. I mean, the defense in this league is back for sure, much more than the offenses. And I think that it's leading the way for the Gators. I still don't know if their offense can go win a game, but they haven't lost it just yet. They haven't gone out and lost a game. Kentucky was close all the way, and I thought the Florida defense let them down in that game with Benny Snell, but the offense hasn't gone out there and lost a game yet. And it could happen very, very soon, but it hasn't happened yet. So you have to hat tip Dan Mullen at some point. You have to give him the credit. We didn't expect it this soon, but it's happening. It's happening at Florida, and it's making the SEC. When the SEC is great, Florida should be good, right? Florida should be good. So we're getting closer to that, but at the same time, it's at the expense of LSU looking like we maybe thought it would preseason, and Auburn just – I don't know what to say about Auburn. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed in Auburn.
It's weird to see where they were, and then now all of a sudden where they are now, and you're just like, what happened? Like where did the offense go? And then, just the inconsistency in play. I mean, Mississippi State holds you to 9 points. I mean, the Mississippi State defense is good, but I mean, are they that good? Like 9 points? And I mean, you talk about a team. I mean, offensively, Mississippi State terrible. I mean, They scored 23 points against Auburn and 350 yards on the ground.
Unbelievable. What is that?
Nick Fitzgerald had almost 200 yards rushing in that game. And this is the Nick Fitzgerald that we said isn't moving as well as Nick Fitzgerald from last year. And then on top of that, the Hill kid gets another 126 yards. So, I mean, now you got to talk about not only is their offense not performing, but now their defense is underperforming, which their defense had been good. I mean, very good the whole year.
Right.
So
I wonder. Again, we talked about it with Alabama a little bit, that the offense is kind of setting up the defense to be on the field more and to be on the field with huge leads and to be on the field with backups. It's not happening at Auburn just like that, but the lack of sustainability from that offense in drives is putting that defense on the field more and longer, and eventually, that great front seven, which is still arguably the best talent-wise in the SEC, those guys are put on the field that much longer. And when you go against a run-heavy attack like Mississippi State that uses the quarterback, it's going to crack. It's going to crack at some point. And it cracked in a big way in that game. I was shocked to see double-digit lead for Mississippi State with those guys rolling like that. Again, we talked about Florida being impressive in rebounding from that emotional game against Mississippi State. Mississippi State was emotional in that game too, and even though they lost, that was tight. That was tight for them. They should have won that game. So you wondered how they would bounce back emotionally with Auburn coming to town. So both Florida and Mississippi State, I think, are benefiting from that emotion, being able to get up for a game of that magnitude so early in the season. Auburn hasn't looked the same since halftime of the LSU game. And it's the same thing last year. Last year, Auburn's up 20 on LSU, loses that game, and just doesn't quite look right until they get to Georgia, Bama, and they win both of those games, which were huge upsets at the time because they didn't quite look right. But that's with Kerryon Johnson. This Auburn team doesn't have that. So there's that offensive fear you sometimes have with Gus Malzahn is non-existent. Where is the passing? I don't understand it. I mean, preseason, there was a poll, Travis Reier, 1029 on Tuscaloosa. He does these great polls and these lists. He asks these questions every day. Who's the biggest winner from the weekend? And this weekend, I said it was the UFC as a whole. But he always asks these great questions. And preseason, one of the questions was, who's the most important singular player in the SEC? And my response, without even blinking, was Jarrett Stidham. It was Jarrett Stidham. I thought Bama could run the table with Jalen Hurts. I still think they could, especially now. I thought Georgia could run the table with Justin Fields or Jake Fromm. But I thought Auburn was the school that if they didn't have their guy, they would fall apart. And yet they're falling apart with their guy, which is just borderline shocking to me. I just don't know if Gus can throw the ball. I don't know if he can orchestrate a progressive game plan through the air. I don't have evidence that he can do that. And if you can't do it against the Mississippi State secondary, and you couldn't do it against the Southern Miss secondary, how are you going to do it against Georgia? How are you going to do it against Bama, mindful that Bama lost the Iron Bowl last year? So you already know how Bama's coming out. How are you going to do that if you can't do it now in October with better weather against weaker opponents? I don't have that answer. I don't know. I think the underperformance of Auburn is the biggest surprise of this SEC season, even more than the gaudy offensive numbers that Alabama has put up. I'm straight up disappointed in Auburn, and I ain't afraid to say it. So
yeah. And just a quick stat from that Mississippi State game. Mississippi State had the ball for 42 minutes.
I mean, what is that?
Just saying. 42 minutes. They only had 69 passing yards, and they had 350 on the ground. So that's, what is that? That's insane.
Arkansas with Darren McFadden, Felix Jones, Peyton Hillis, and one of the 12 Allen brothers. This is Mississippi State.
Mississippi State with Nick Fitzgerald and
Kyler Hill.
Kyler Hill. What's his name?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kyler. Yeah. So I mean, that's a bit surprising to me. And then Stidham underperformed again, 19 of 38 for 214, no touchdowns, no interceptions.
Throwing at 50%.
And then only putting up 90 yards on the ground. I mean, Whitlow had 88, and then 17 and 8 from the rest of the guys, and then Stidham with negative 22 yards rushing. Like,
Crazy.
I don't know.
Yeah, the SEC is a little upside down depending on how you look at it, but certainly at the top it is very consistent.
Yes.
Bama and Georgia. I mean, what's up with Georgia, Kev? I mean, they're winning, and the point
They
total
are winning, and
but
they're
something don't feel right. Something don't feel as gaudy and
yeah.
with the Bulldogs.
I mean, it's hard to say what that difference is for me. I do agree that they don't feel like the Georgia team of last year, and it's weird to say because I mean, God, they're averaging 40 points a game. I mean, 45, 41, 49, 43, 38, 41. I mean, they're averaging 40 points a game, but it just doesn't feel like a Georgia off. I mean, they lost the time of possession to Vandy. Yeah, I mean, Vandy had the ball for 31 minutes opposed to Georgia's 28. And, obviously the 560 yards of offense for Georgia, I mean, I'm not knocking that offense, but for some reason it just doesn't feel the same as it did last year. I don't know why, but I agree with you. It's just I just feel like they could implode at any moment and they could lose out or they're gonna win out, and I don't know why I feel that way. It feels weird to me.
Yeah, and I'm with you. And I think what makes it feel weirder is that Justin Fields is there, and you wonder what that means. Like, is it only a matter of time? And again, this is nothing against Jake Fromm. I love Jake Fromm. I'm a big Jake Fromm fan. I scouted him a ton in high school. Remember, he was supposed to be the Bama quarterback commit before he decommitted, and Bama settled for some guy named Tua. Nice job there by Lane. I'm a big athletic cat, smart, tough, gritty, consistent. But you just have to wonder, are they going to pull the plug at some point? When do they do it? At the first sign of those numbers not looking great, does that happen? The new culture of quarterbacking with these freshman phenoms is that, and Nick Saban is the reason for this now, they need to see the field. The politics have to go aside at some point. Even with Nick. And Nick was politicking so weird preseason, early in the season, all of that with the Jalen stuff. It was so odd. It was so odd from a guy who has been a bottom line guy for such a long time in terms of winning, in terms of putting the best player on the field. But he's over it finally. And you wonder if his mentee, his student, Kirby Smart, eventually does that. Heck, it's the reason Kirby doesn't have a national championship ring. So
yeah,
I wonder if that's what it is. Is it just everyone expecting, hey, at some point, one is going to get on the field and it's going to be his team. We've seen it with Lawrence. I wonder what Kelly Bryant is doing, by the way. We've seen it there. We've seen it at Alabama. We've seen it in Wake Forest. We've seen it all over the country. We've seen it at Notre Dame. When you have that guy that maybe the rest of the team
dynamic.
It's not even if they know he's better, if they think he might be better. I think that's the better way to put it. If that guy's on the roster, it's like there's something, something's coming. It's like I'm in Tampa right now, and I know this damn hurricane is on the way in some way, shape, or form. You know it's coming. You feel it. So guess what? I'm not going to plan a beach day for tomorrow. It might not come, and I might be able to go to the beach, but I feel like I can't. So I wonder if that is just looming at Georgia, and that's the difference. I don't know that, but I wonder that because, like you said, it doesn't quite feel the same with the Bulldogs. So we'll see. Obviously, we'll see tangibly with LSU, Auburn, and eventually we think Alabama in Atlanta. Good point made in the comments here by William Lay. He says it's tough to get rid of Gus with $42 million on the table. Man, I was talking to a Georgia source this morning, actually, right before we jumped on here. And he said, man, do you think they're regretting that extension, or how much are they regretting that extension? $42 million for a guy who, when he doesn't have a Heisman type guy, when he doesn't have an SEC player of the year type guy, hadn't shown us anything beyond, a B, a C plus type of resume, a B or a C plus type of season. Amazing to think about that. The SEC,
He better take some. He better take some of that extension and find him a quarterback.
well, I mean, he thinks it's Bo Nix, but again, skill set wise, is Jarrett Stidham better than Bo Nix? Probably. So what's the drop off here? Because Jarrett Stidham's a guy he's had on campus for 2+ years now. So it's not like, oh, well, you brought in this JUCO transfer like Cam Newton where you only have him for a few months. No, this isn't the case. He's had time to develop and progress and sit down with Jarrett and say, okay, what routes do you like? What type of concepts in the passing game do you like? Do you want to go high-low? Do you want to go waggle and play that game? Do you want to play the bubble screen game to set something up? He should know Jarrett, and Jarrett should know him to where it's different on the field. And it doesn't feel like that. It feels like Tua and Mike Locksley, who have barely worked together, have gone beyond that a million times and know what each other wants, but not the offensive guru and the quarterback that he plucked because of the Art Briles debacle from Baylor. I mean, you would think the moment he said, hey, we're going to go get Jarrett Stidham, that he had that stuff in mind, and there's no evidence of that, which is unbelievable to think about. So Auburn's been disappointing, and it's the Plains will be interesting these next few weeks. If they start losing, Kev, pull up their schedule. If Auburn starts losing a couple more of these before Georgia, before Alabama, things can get really, really dicey in a very short time, especially when you think of what's going on the other side of the state. And that's what makes it even more interesting. Alabama couldn't be hotter. Alabama couldn't be rolling better. So every loss is magnified that much more with the Tigers. And I know it ain't over yet. What they got, Kev?
So they got Tennessee, Ole Miss, A&M,
Oof.
Georgia,
Oof.
Liberty,
Buckshot,
baby, and in the year the Iron Bowl.
Yeah. How many? I mean, what are you thinking? How many else?
So I mean, Tennessee win. I think they beat Tennessee. I think they probably beat Ole Miss.
Don't get in a shootout with Ole Miss.
Yeah, I don't think they beat Texas A&M. I don't think they beat Georgia. Who knows? Shoot, Buckshot might shock the world.
That's Liberty's quarterback, by the way.
But Stephen Calver, he's a great quarterback for Liberty. Good story. And then the Iron Bowl, I don't see it being close either. So I mean, you got 1, 2, maybe 3 more wins to end with 7 wins.
Exactly. 7-5 Auburn is not a good look. Is not a good look. So
not a good look at all.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know. Didn't A&M beat them last year with Kevin Sumlin as sort of a lame duck coach? I believe they beat Auburn. So It's crazy.
Yeah, because that was right before the Georgia, and then the Iron Bowl roll. Because everybody was like, "Well, Texas A&M just beat them, and then they limped into Georgia, and
Right, right.
they ended up beating Georgia and beating Bama." So,
Yeah.
yeah, and this is also the team that beat Washington. Does this hurt? Does it hurt Washington going forward? I mean,
It
it's
has
got to
to.
hurt. It's got to hurt Washington.
It has to. It's the opposite of Notre Dame and Michigan, where Michigan's like rooting on Notre Dame, like y'all need to go win because it makes us look good. And conversely, Notre Dame would want that victory over Michigan to mean more by the Wolverines winning. And for Auburn, it looks good because Washington has only won. But on the flip side, it's like Washington's like, dang man, this is our only loss. Like we lost to the team that just lost to Mississippi State and struggled with Southern Miss and could theoretically go 7-5. Not a good look. And the committee, that's going to hurt Washington. The Pac-12 is already down. Preseason teams in the Pac-12 that we thought would be better have already shown us that they're not. Stanford, USC.
God, my Pac-12 sucks.
Stanford and USC are way down. UCLA still hadn't won a game, I don't think. Really, it's on Oregon and Washington, and I think they play Saturday. So,
and Washington, and let's not forget, Washington struggled with a no-win UCLA this weekend.
Yeah, they defeated UCLA.
Like 31-24, like barely getting by.
Right. So Washington has to win out and has to start thinking about winning out big, like BCS style. So
yeah, they still have to play. They still have to play Oregon. They still have to play undefeated Colorado, who's looking like the gym in the Pac-12 right now. It's still weird for me to say Colorado Pac-12.
Agree. I wasn't even thinking of it.
Then they play Cal, who's shown they're a decent team this year. Then they still have to play Stanford as well. So I mean, who knows what that could like. They could win out, or they could lose 3 more games. I mean,
yeah, that Auburn win was great week 1, and it was like validation. And then now it's like you're lucky you got it, because I don't know if you'd be ranked otherwise. It's crazy times in the SEC.
Well, they dropped from 8th to 21. So
right, and I saw the rankings. It's funny because a lot of the teams in the rankings are behind teams that they've defeated. So I believe Mississippi State is slightly behind Auburn. LSU is slightly ahead of Florida.
Only because they were ranked top 10 before.
Right. But that's the thing. And that's why people say, who gives a rip about the preseason rankings and the early rankings, because of these scenarios where teams who literally defeated the team right ahead of them are still ahead of them. It's kind of a joke. And again, the committee will take care of all of that, you would think. But it's funny to see on Monday, yesterday, that all of these teams that have losses to teams right ahead of them are still in that position. So kind of funny. Well, I guess.
So, question from the chat, real quick: who's worse, the Pac-12 or the ACC?
Oh God. Well, I mean, that's funny because we were, last week. Some of our questions were: how good is Florida? How good is Kentucky? And is anyone good in the ACC not named Clemson? And I think FSU Miami showed us that answer is no. Nobody else is good in the ACC. I mean, UVA might beat Miami this weekend, and I don't think that would be a shock. That's the state.
It wouldn't shock me.
Right. The state of the ACC is that the Virginia Cavaliers might beat Miami, and it might not surprise a lot of people. That's where the ACC is. That is never good. We just said Florida needs to be good for the SEC. Well, Miami and FSU need to be good for the ACC, and we don't know. We don't have that.
There needs to be a lot more teams good for the ACC right now. None of the traditional, or even the once in a 5-year period teams are good for the ACC right now. I mean, Carolina, they've had their years where they've been amazing, but they're 1-3 this year. Pitt has flashed in the ACC. They're 3-3. Louisville's flashed in the ACC. They're 2-4. Duke is 4-1. I mean, Duke is 4-1 and is considered one of the better teams in the ACC this year.
They might be the second best team.
Yeah, Duke might be they might be that team, but they lost to Virginia Tech after Virginia Tech lost to ODU. So what is like?
Welcome
the ACC is just. I mean,
yeah.
You only have 3 ranked teams in the ACC: Clemson at 4, NC State at 20, and Miami at 16. NC State. I mean, do I really think that NC State team is a 5-0 team? I mean, maybe, but I mean, the rest of their schedule is they play Clemson, and I mean, really, they play Clemson. They play Clemson, Syracuse, Florida State, Wake, Louisville, Carolina, and ECU. I mean, and their 5 wins are JMU, Georgia State. Their West Virginia game got canceled. They beat Marshall, they beat UVA, and they beat Boston College. So, I mean, is that NC State team really that good? I don't think so.
Yeah, so it's the ACC. Well, I still don't know that answer. I'm trying to stall as I think about it. The Pac-12 has had some heavyweight disappointments in USC and Stanford, teams that a lot of people thought could be playoff contenders. Heck, Kevin had USC in the playoff preseason.
No. I had them winning the Pac-12.
Okay.
Not in the playoff, but winning the Pac-12.
I mean, that could still happen, I guess.
Easy.
So, did the ACC have any other schools that you thought could legitimately contend outside of Clemson? I would say no. Preseason, I don't think anybody thought, well, we didn't think Miami or Florida State were there. We thought they had a lot of talent, but not necessarily college football playoff talent. So in that regard, I think the Pac-12 was more disappointing because more contenders are already out of it completely. The one contender in the ACC who we've always talked about is Clemson, and they're still very much rolling. And they're back on track now with a healthy Trevor Lawrence and a defense that made a high-flying passing attack at Wake look like garbage. So Clemson is fine.
So let me take a timeout from the game real quick. We don't usually talk lines, like bet lines and stuff on Monday on the early.
Bro, I'm shutting this thing down.
On the early show, but can I was just looking at the Pac-12 schedule for this week when we're talking about Pac-12 ACC, who's better, who's worse. Okay, so the Pac-12, Colorado plays at USC this week. Why is USC favored in that game? They're 3-2 versus the 19th ranked Colorado team, and they're favored by a touchdown.
Where is it at? The Coliseum?
It's at the Coliseum, but I mean, is the Coliseum really that big of a?
No, LA doesn't care about USC if they're not winning.
Yeah, I mean that's what I'm saying. Like
the Rams town now.
Yeah, exactly. So sorry, I know we don't talk that on this show, but I just couldn't help throw that out there. But yeah, Washington, Oregon plays this week. That could be big for the Pac-12, and I mean, really, there's no other. UCLA plays Cal. Let's see if
the Pac-12 needs Washington to win that game.
The Pac-12 for the Pac-12, yes.
Right, and Oregon winning wouldn't surprise anybody.
No.
Right. So
because if Oregon wins, now you're
now it's all on Colorado.
Now it's all on Colorado, and
that's how. I mean, Cordell Stewart ain't walked through that door.
Not at all.
So. Yeah, that's
not getting 5 downs.
Yeah, I think by default, by that answer, tells you that I think the Pac-12 has to be more disappointing. If the hope is on Washington and maybe Colorado versus Clemson, I think the ACC is kind of where we thought it would be to some degree, and Pac-12 isn't. So with that in mind, I think the Pac-12 is more disappointing, but they're both very disappointing. Thereafter, they're contenders for sure. The Big Ten and the SEC, man, the Big 12 took a hit this week with Oklahoma losing so early, I thought. Texas is a fun story, but is anyone going to put them in the playoff? Is anyone going to start drumming up playoff expectations for those guys? I mean, it's possible, but a team that gives up 40-plus points multiple times, I mean, That doesn't feel right.
And not forget, lost to Maryland to begin the year.
Maryland.
Who I know they've gone through
right out of the gates, despite all the garbage and unfortunate scenarios going on in Maryland, and they lost that game.
Yeah, it's just God. Yeah, the Big 12. The Big 12 didn't have a good weekend. Oklahoma lost. West Virginia struggled with Kansas.
What is that?
Oklahoma State, the only other ranked team, they lost. I mean, Baylor beat Kansas State. I mean, what like
Kansas State has not looked good at all this year.
Kansas State's 2-4. I mean, the Big 12 is struggling big time again.
We thought that Mississippi State going to Kansas State and winning was impressive early.
Not anymore.
Yeah, how does that look? Yeah, so it's all about the SEC and the Big Ten right now, and at some point these Big Ten schools are going to carve each other up. And Michigan, Wisconsin this week, that will eliminate one of those two from playoff contention because they both have one loss.
Yeah, so you got Michigan, Wisconsin, which is the crossover game.
Right.
Crossover and division game. So whoever takes that, they both have one loss. So whoever takes that L is definitely out of contention. Penn State plays Michigan State, which God knows what Michigan State team's going to show up.
Yeah, I don't trust them anymore.
Yeah, they're 3-2, and then Ohio State plays Minnesota, so that's probably a no-brainer.
Yeah, so it's
Maryland at Rutgers at Maryland though. There you go.
That.
And then there's that. But then you also have the 0-5 Nebraska at 2-3 Northwestern.
0-5 Nebraska. What a joke. What a joke that is.
If you would have told me Nebraska would have been 0-5,
could you imagine, Willie Taggart's getting a lot of crap right now. Could you imagine if they were 0-5?
Oh, God. I'm
not going to play the race car, but y'all see where it's going here.
There would have been
0-5, and everyone's like, "Oh, let's give him some time." Willie Taggart loses a game, and they're like, "He's done. Get rid of him."
He lost to Virginia Tech, and they were ready to buy his contract out.
Yeah,
they were creating GoFundMe's after the Virginia Tech game.
I'm just saying those are facts.
So I get it. Nebraska has struggled big time. They lost to Troy. They lost big to Purdue, who has been a disappointment. So, okay, they got Northwestern, then they play Minnesota, then they play Bethune-Cookman. Their first win could be Bethune-Cookman.
BCC in the building.
And who would say, what happens if Bethune-Cookman beats Nebraska? They don't win a game, I don't think.
That's amazing.
But, good Lord.
Amazing, yeah. So, it's on Ohio State and those guys in the Big Ten. Penn State's still in decent position. They got to win out, but Ohio State's the flag bearer, and I think they're separating themselves as the best team there. The Big Ten has been disappointing with the middle teams, but the top is sort of the top, the same top it's been for a while. But we'll see. We'll see how good those guys are. I thought Dwayne Haskins has played well recently, but I think he's getting a little overhyped, a little bit. So we'll get into recruiting. I'm seeing a lot of recruiting questions here in the chat. We're going to get to recruiting. I think we'll go back to Bama real quick. The injury to Trevon Diggs, I think, is interesting in the timing. First of all, how severe is this broken foot? Is this, are we talking Liz Frank type injury where season's over? It doesn't seem that way. So that's good news. And the way LSU and Auburn have been playing, could you make the argument that Bama just needs Trevon Diggs to come back for Georgia? Bama just needs Trevon Diggs to come back by December and not even November, which is where we thought was the real gauntlet. It's still going to be a gauntlet of physicality because those front sevens at LSU and Auburn and Mississippi State aren't going anywhere. But defensively, In terms of covering wide receivers, LSU, Mississippi State, Auburn, I mean, even Georgia to some degree. Do they terrify you as Alabama fans? Because they shouldn't. They really shouldn't at this point. But I do think that it's a significant injury in that Trevon Diggs has been the best corner on the Alabama roster this year. Patrick Surtain a close second. And quietly, since the theoretical demotion he had, Savion Smith has played very, very well over the last few weeks for Alabama. Shaheem Carter, we said at preseason, would be the glue guy in that secondary, so he theoretically increases his reps with Diggs out, and I could see him as a starter potentially. You go Shaheem Carter opposite Patrick Surtain, and then you work Savion Smith in with the sub packages among the cornerbacks. So I wonder how Bama combats that. But the fear of losing Trevon Diggs preseason versus losing him now in terms of the games he would miss is not the same conversation. I think preseason you would say this is a huge, huge situation for Alabama because of the schools on the schedule that we would think would air it out a little bit more. But when you consider the development of Patrick Surtain, the sustainability and consistency of Shaheem Carter, and the quiet, solid play of Savion Smith, all of a sudden it doesn't feel like it is that big of a deal in the short term. Long term, you're going to need Trevon Diggs. He's been your best corner. But short term, I think Bama can survive. And, you know, I was talking to an SEC source this morning, and we were talking about, you know, who could beat Alabama? What does Bama need to happen? And at some point, they need to play a two-half game. They need to have to earn it. They need to have to go out there and grind their way towards a win. But I don't know when that's going to happen. Drew Lock and Missouri are coming to town Saturday, so that could present a different challenge. But that Missouri defense is not very good, and it's in Tuscaloosa, and Bama's healthy offensively. So I'm just not sure. Where the Tigers have a clear lead in mind there. But Drew Lock's a test for sure, and I think that'll be a good test for Alabama in having to replace Trevon Diggs here in the short term. Kev, anything else on Bama, on the SEC before we jump into some of these questions?
No, I don't think so. I think you pretty much hit on all of that.
All right, well, questions at me.
So we'll get into the live chat a little bit since we've fallen behind a little bit. So as of right now, DJ asks, you know, do we flip Akeem? Does Bama flip Akeem Dent?
Got to get him on campus. 5-star FSU commit. You know, that's one of the units that's been playing pretty well for the Seminoles. So I don't know if their struggles impact a guy like that compared to edge rushers like Kayvon Thibodeau or a linebacker like Nakobe Dean. I don't know if it's the same type of impact, especially considering that Dent is committed to FSU and has been for quite some time. And you could make the argument that Bama's been a long-time threat, but Miami's kind of hanging around here for Akeem Dent. So I'm not sure as time progresses if Bama remains the top threat for Dent. It looks like they're playing the long-term game in the secondary in terms of recruiting. Once they missed on Dax Hill, it seems like Bama's going to play the waiting game for guys like Noah Pola Gates, who's not deciding anytime soon. Dent's not going to have a decision anytime soon. So I think that they're going to play patient in the secondary, and that could give Miami time to push more consistently. And they're still the local school for Dent. So watch out for Miami a little bit with Akeem. So I'll say no to that question right now. I don't think Dent ends up in the class.
Okay. Does Bama flip Pickens from Auburn? And I think a lot of that has to do with the decommitment of Hazelwood from Georgia and where he ends up. I think the early on talk was Auburn was the favorite after the decommitment from Georgia. And so, I think if depending on where Hazelwood ends up would be whether or not Bama is able to get in there and flip Pickens from
and that's,
Auburn.
what's interesting is, like you said, Auburn has been the long-term school to watch for Hazelwood. Now, he was visiting Miami last weekend, right after the decommitment. So the industry said, okay, Miami now might be the top threat to Georgia, but Pickens is a part of this somewhere, right? Somewhere.
Yeah.
They're close friends. They know each other well. They played together for Cam Newton's 7-on-7 team. They played together all week at the opening. They've known each other for a long time, and they're very similar in skill set. So all of these things make me think that they're not going to play together. They're not two of the most unselfish football players in the world, and it's understandable. They're big, strong, wide receiver one type guys. So I think they end up at different schools. So the ball really is in Hazelwood's court, like you said, Kev. Pickens is already committed to Auburn. He can take as long as he wants. We think Hazelwood is going to be finalized beforehand. I want to say Hazelwood is an early enrollee. Pickens, with his academic situation, is not an early enrollee. So I think that gives Pickens the benefit of the doubt of waiting. So if Miami can secure Hazelwood, then the Pickens situation becomes Auburn, Alabama, Florida State. If Hazelwood ends up at Auburn, then I think the Pickens situation becomes Alabama, Florida State, maybe Georgia too. Well, the difference between the two guys is that Hazelwood is really watching these offenses, which if you're Auburn, you got to start sweating a little bit, because holding on to Pickens is one issue, and getting Hazelwood is another one. And Hazelwood is the one on record the last time we talked that said, I am watching these offenses very, very closely. And I don't think it's a coincidence that he decommits as we still wait to see what Georgia is going to look like. Remember, his buddy isn't Jake Fromm. His buddy's Justin Fields. So could there be some back channeling going on here with Hazelwood in Georgia? And again, he's the one who we know Saturdays watching these passing attacks. So that has only the potential to benefit Alabama and hurt Auburn, in my opinion. So I think Auburn has to tread very lightly here. Do you go all in on trying to get Hazelwood now that he's back on the market, or do you double down on Pickens, who you already have committed? Because again, I don't see a scenario where Auburn gets both, especially when we know Hazelwood is watching these passing games on Saturdays. There's no reason Auburn should feel great today versus a week ago when it comes to Hazelwood, especially after that Miami visit and especially after the way that they have performed. So I think Auburn should focus more on Pickens, and Hazelwood ends up potentially elsewhere. But the ball is in his court, because no team is going to say no to Jaden Hazelwood. He's the number one receiver in the country. He should be the number one receiver in the country. He is slightly better than George Pickens, and I think his recruitment will follow through as such. So I think Bama's got some speed bumps along the way towards Pickens, and a lot of it does have to do with Hazelwood. Bama fans should track Hazelwood as much as it tracks George Pickens. And the real dark horse scenario is if Hazelwood's watching these offenses and he knows Tua is going to be in town one more year minimum, do you start to wonder if Bama can get involved with Jaden Hazelwood? He's teammates with the current Bama commit in Rashad Cheney. We know Bama can recruit the Atlanta area, and guess what? The Atlanta area recruiter for Alabama is its wide receivers coach, Josh Gaddis. So some of those way in the back, back of the highest counter at Walmart, highest shelf, way in the back there is Alabama sitting for Jaden Hazelwood. So I wonder, since he is back on the market, if Bama starts to knock on that door just a little bit more. And you wonder if Bama has the ball in its court, who it would take between Hazelwood and Pickens. That's a story for another day, but either way, one is connected to the other, and those two alphas are probably not going to end up at the same school. So Bama could stand to benefit for one or the other.
Yep. And then moving down the live chat, why has Georgia been having so many decommits?
It's a good question. One of them is very simple. Jaden Hazelwood. That's the only simple one here. And he decommitted because, like I said, he's looking at these offenses. He's taking these visits, and it's very clear Georgia has not impressed him as much as maybe he thought they would preseason, combined with the fact that these other schools are pressing for the number one 5-star wide receiver. That one makes sense. Everything else, you got to dig a little bit deeper, and you got to start thinking of who Kirby Smart is, what his goals are, and where he comes from. Look, he comes from Alabama. He comes from the Nick Saban recruiting school. And that means if you have some 4-star decommitments and you don't see other schools going crazy for him, it usually means you got a situation where there could have been a drop or two. I'm not saying both of those other cats were drops, but I do know at least one of them was. I'm not going to put the kid's name out there, but you got a 50% shot. And it's very possible both were. So I think this is actually a good thing for Georgia, minus Hazelwood. Hazelwood is his own beast as a recruit. Everything else, I think, is a positive for Georgia. And I actually think that they're getting ready to load up here even more so. Doesn't mean everything's perfect, but I do think that the non-Hazelwood moves were mutual. Let's just say that. And that Georgia is taking a smaller class, so they're not going to take a guy who maybe isn't the prospect they once thought he was. We've seen Bama do it, and we're obviously going to see Georgia do it in the past. So beyond Hazelwood, I wouldn't worry if I was a Bulldog fan.
Let's see. Do you think Notre Dame is legit? Question mark.
Go ahead, Kev.
I mean, I thought Notre Dame was, my sleeper team to begin the year with, and then after they beat Michigan, I reconfirmed that Notre Dame was my sleeper team, and then they switched to Ian Book, and now they look even better than they did with Brandon Wimbush. So, I mean, they don't have a lot left on the schedule as far as big tests. They passed their big test in Michigan. They passed their big test in Virginia Tech, and they passed their big test in Stanford. So they've passed all three of their big tests. So let's see if they can finish it out. I do think that if they go through and they beat USC at the end of the year and they're undefeated, then I think they're in the playoffs. So.
Yeah, so you definitely feel that Notre Dame's legit, and so do I. And I think you mentioned the big test that they passed in terms of what we thought would be big tests. They did pass them, but they also passed a test that we didn't think was going to be a huge one with Vandy. You have to win the ugly game. You have to get – it's the game we're talking about Alabama having. We hadn't seen it yet, but we feel like Bama needs to muck it up a little bit and have one of those games. You need to win the game where maybe you shouldn't have won it. And we've seen Florida win it at Mississippi State. Notre Dame won it against Vandy. Look, Sherman threw a great ball, and the kid dropped the pass on 4th down, and that was it. So you have to kind of escape almost. Look, Ohio State did it at Penn State. There's no reason that they should have ran that play on 4th down. There's no reason that they should have blown that 2-score lead in the 4th quarter at home. But Ohio State won a game it wasn't supposed to win. Notre Dame has done it. Florida has done it. Heck, LSU did it against Auburn. Good teams find a way to win those games. Miami just did it against Florida State. You have to have those games you're not supposed to win, and you still pull it out. So I think that was that game for Notre Dame. We're seeing them playing up to their competition when it's a big boy team every single time. Going into Lane Stadium and winning, I don't know if our viewers have been there. You've been there, Kev. I've been there. It is different.
It's a different place, man.
They can get up for any game, and they were up for ND coming to town.
I mean, that was that's still one of my loudest experiences. Is I was at Virginia Tech. I was at Virginia Tech, Miami, when I was in high school as a recruit. I was at Virginia Tech, Miami. And there was
three. Was that Marcus Vick? Who was the quarterback there?
It was 3 versus 6. And
was it Glennon, Vick? Who was that quarterback?
I believe it was Glennon. Or it might have been Marcus. It might have been Marcus's last year, but I think it was Glennon. And there was 3 versus 6. Miami came to town on a Thursday night, and that place was rocking. And they standing on the sideline in the little recruit area, and Enter Sandman turns on, and the whole place loses their damn mind. And it's literally you're standing on grass, but you feel the vibrations, and it's just another place. It's just different.
Right. So
It's like how we talk about Kyle Field. Like Lane Stadium is one of those places.
right. So Notre Dame has passed all of these tests. The tests that we thought were big tests, like that one, and then the ones that we weren't anticipating, like Vandy. So I think they're legit. Now, college football playoffs, a different story. We'll wait and see. But you guys know this. You guys are smart. Just like last year, they weren't going to keep Bama out of that thing with one loss. If they have any reason to get Notre Dame in, they'll do it. Notre Dame travels well. This is a business. It's a business, guys. You got to get the good teams in if everything's even. So I think Notre Dame can get in maybe even with a letdown. Obviously, it depends on the SEC and the Big Ten because we know the Big 12, the ACC have dropped the ball here, and heck, Clemson can drop the ball. But it depends heavily on the SEC and the Big Ten. So I think Notre Dame can get in undefeated. They're in. Like I'm convinced now that they're in pretty much no matter what at this point. One loss, we'll see. But I wouldn't put it past the committee. Notre Dame's a brand. They want them in. I know it's human now, and we look at all the tape and all of that, but Notre Dame hasn't been fluky in these games. They won it with two different quarterbacks, two different styles. They got the Dexter Williams kid back, and he's a difference maker. He's on another level at running back right now. I think they're for real. Their defense is flying around. I think Notre Dame is 100% legit.
Yeah. So moving around on the board, your take on UCF in the top 10.
You can have that. I'm not going to act like I've watched UCF a bunch this year.
Well, I won't act like I've watched UCF a lot this year either, but the little bit that I have watched of UCF, I mean, Mackenzie Milton is the real deal quarterback. I mean, he's the third Hawaiian quarterback out of that group that is performing well in the away from Hawaii. Top 10. I thought they were going to fall off this year, to be honest. I thought they had their national championship season last year and then they were going to fall off and we really weren't going to hear much from them. But, I mean, again, this year they're showing they're probably the best group of 6 team in the country, and they'll probably make a New Year's Bowl if they win out.
Exactly. And you know, it's just like last year. They're undefeated. They're rolling for sure. Mackenzie Milton's a boss. We know that. Let's see if they can get by USF and Mr. Blake Barnett in the war on I-4. That's coming at the end of the year. We all know that they have to go undefeated to be in any type of conversation and to remain a top 10 type team. So right now they're doing what they have to do. They're fulfilling the basic requirements, but we all know that last game is the game for those guys. And then the conference championship game after that. So they can get by USF for a second straight year. It was a shootout last year with Quentin Flowers. It could be a shootout with Blake Barnett this year, which is fun to say on this show. Like it's your quarterback and still the highest rated quarterback you've ever brought in versus the team that thinks they were the national champions over you from last year. So that's a fun game. Yeah, Bama fans should watch that. I'll be watching that. We should go to that game, by the way. Anyway, I don't know about top 10 right now, but it doesn't matter because to stay there, they got to go undefeated and they got to beat USF. So after they do that, if they do that, we'll talk.
Yeah. Anybody you've heard moving up Bama's board?
Yeah, senior year tape we know is big for Alabama. I think it has helped guys like Wan'Dale Robinson, the other receiver in this scenario. We're talking about Pickens and Hazelwood and all of that, but Wan'Dale Robinson's probably the most likely of the three. And he's making a decision very soon. It could be this week between Bama, Ohio State, Nebraska. Bama's been thrilled with his offseason, with the camp performance, but they followed it up with this year, and he has been that Jalen Waddle, scat back slot receiver. How could he cut so quickly guy? So I think if he commits to Bama and they take his commitment, which is the expectation to some degree, I think he's a guy who really upped his stock as a senior. I think guys like Noah Pola-Gates out west is doing that. Henry To'o is doing that out west as well. And also some guys who we expected to be in the conversation have validated it. Multiple analysts who I talked to say that Nakobe Dean's been the best player that they have seen in person this year, period. I haven't seen him live yet, but I trust those guys. Two of the best players I've seen in person this year, Evan Neal, Trey Sanders, Clay Webb, all of those guys are validating it. So it's not just the guys who are 3 and 4 stars who are validating their ascent as seniors, but it's also these 5 stars kind of holding true. And for the most part, those guys have done so. Ishmael Sopsher is another one out in Louisiana. There's a lot more Bama traction with him. So it's kind of the usual names who've climbed the board, but it's also been some 4-star guys who we didn't know if they were 1, 2, or 3 that are much more in the 1 to 2 range with Pola-Gates, Wan'Dale Robinson, To'o for sure. I think those guys are all helping their case. By the way, Bama Online reporting that Nakobe Dean might be in town Saturday, so that is not a bad deal for Alabama. We'll have much more on that in a couple days, but that's just a quick note to pass along that I'm sure you guys will not hate.
Nice. That's a big one in getting him on campus. I know
there's been the most important recruit in my mind.
Yeah. So, I have a question for you about commits. Any of the commits that have been performing better than you expected this year, or better than we thought they would?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think as we reevaluate at 24/7 Sports, of course, my daily home, we've been looking at a lot of senior tape the last 2-3 weeks, and you're going to see some bumps, and they're not just Bama bumps because they're committed there. There are multiple commits who are balling as seniors, and you got to start on the defensive line. A lot of these commits have performed better than their rankings have suggest. I think Rashard Cheney's about where we have them. Kevin Harris, same thing. But when you start getting into the Antonio Alfano, Justin Eboigbe, DJ Dale conversation in that order, those guys have played above their grade. And if you look at the rankings, that's saying a lot because Antonio Alfano is a top 60, 65 player in the country. Eboigbe is top 150 in the country. So you're talking about Alfano threatening 5-star status. I think that's probably the most substantial bump you'll see with these Alabama commitments. He has been dominant. We've showcased him here. We've had him on the show. Bama fan Dave went to go see him, and we've got video there on our YouTube channel. So check that out from a couple weeks ago. Alfano has looked like that each and every week. He has been the dominant force that would require that move up. And Eboigbe might have been better this year than Alfano. He's a little further down the ranking, so it would be a bigger haul to get him up to 5-star status, but I think he solidified himself so far as a top 100 recruit. And look, these are the positions we talked about Alabama needing to solidify. Defensive line, that was the big position this year. Raekwon Davis may be gone after this year. I believe Quinnen Williams is a redshirt sophomore, so he could theoretically be gone after this year. We haven't talked a lot about this, so I got to double check that. But he could be gone in the next year or so. So there needs to be reinforcements on the defensive line. Isaiah Buggs is gone for sure after this year. So the D-line has been a priority over the long-standing recruitment of this 2019 class. And 3 players in that unit, Dale, Eboigbe, and especially Alfano, have all raised their stock from the offseason into their senior season. So a good question, and you're going to see those reflected shortly. Pierce Quick will not be the only 5-star in this class for Alabama. That would have been a guarantee for a long time, but it's going to be a guarantee proven here sooner, much rather than later. Very good question, producer Kev.
Quinnen Quinnen is a redshirt sophomore, so technically he is eligible for the draft after this year.
Okay, so that's why you're the producer and I'm not. So yeah, so you could theoretically lose that starting front. You do have LeBron Ray, you do have some other pieces, but obviously if you lose 3 guys up front, that's pretty rough. So those guys performing is important because you're going to see them on the field very soon in Tuscaloosa.
Yeah. And I got one more question before we wrap things up here.
Yeah, let's end it on this note then.
I have my opinion on who I think it should be. I want to hear your thoughts on who's the 1 or 2 guys on the defense, the young guys on the defense that you think right now need to either A, step up into bigger roles, whether it's through their play or through practice or whatever. Who are those 1 to 2 guys that you think the Tide needs moving forward to handle things on defense? I have my 2. I don't want to know yours.
Oh, okay. I'll go. On the defense right now, right?
Right now, yeah.
Already playing. Well, look, I think is Mac Wilson a young guy? I mean, does he count?
Okay, so let's go with the guys that aren't starting right now that Alabama could use.
Right.
Maybe in lieu of these guys that aren't performing up to standards.
Right. I thought you were going to say in lieu out of. I'll start with LeBron Ray. I think we talked about it all year. Bama's going to need one of these other guys to emerge, and LeBron Ray has been playing a little bit more each week. I think you guys have noticed. After those 3 guys, he's the next guy, and he's going to play a little bit more inside than maybe he's comfortable with, and I think Bama's trying to get him reps there. But I think he's going to have to be a playmaker this year when the rotation is needed most. Again, you get into November and December, you're talking about teams that have the ability to run the football, or at least want to run the football. When you get to LSU, Mississippi State, Auburn, Georgia, those teams would like to establish the run if they have the choice. So you're going to need a rotation there. And then it goes right to the second level after that. If you got D linemen to stop the run, you need some LBs as well. And I think that there have been legitimate question marks at that linebacker position this year. I don't know, Mac, Dylan Moses, etc. Even with those 2, I still think you need guys to step up. Josh McMillan's not a young guy, but he's been kind of the first guy off of the bench. Does that remain the case going forward, or does Markel Benton, maybe Ale Cajo, become one to kind of take that spot from him? I think you need a 3rd linebacker on the inside to step up at some point. I feel like Alabama is going to need that.
All right.
What you got?
All right. Okay. Well, my two were at the same levels, the front level and the linebacker level. For my first level guys, I went with Anoma. I feel like he could provide that edge rush that has been lacking with the injury to Terrell Lewis and that such. So I feel like Anoma on the defensive line and then Ali Cajo at the second level. He's starting to work his way into the late game stuff when they're up big. He's starting to work his way in. And I said that I thought that, by the end of the year he'd be in more of a rotation with Mac and all that. So I think those are my 2 that I would like to see step up and take bigger roles in the defense, just because Anoma gives that pass rush off the edge that we haven't quite seen this year. Because good Lord, when that kid gets in, I mean, he's flying around off the edge, collapsing pockets and all that. And then, I mean, the athleticism that you've seen out of Cajo, even just if you've just watched him on kickoff, is pretty impressive. So, yeah,
a couple of 5-stars there that I think Bama will need at some point. Good call with Anoma. The edge rushing has been a little inconsistent for sure this year. So again, some of that has to do with the style of game that has been played, but we think at some point that will change. So we'll see how Bama adjusts. But these guys, the depth will essentially be needed sooner rather than later. So good stuff. Producer Kev, we appreciate you today. Thank you guys for stopping by on a Tuesday in the middle of the day. We didn't plan that, but here we are talking, shooting the breeze and what have you. We appreciate you. We'll put this in podcast form for those of you who were unable to catch it live, and we'll be back at some point for another show later in the week. We'll talk more recruiting, look a little bit more at the Missouri Tigers ahead of another college football weekend. For producer Kev, I'm John Garcia Jr. God bless. Garcia out.